What's going on, guys? It's Garrett and Lincoln of RUNAMUCK MMA, and today, ladies and gentlemen, we are coming at you with a discussion, a topic, a roundabout of thoughts and ideas that is somewhat overdue. We've decided that because there has been pretty engaging topic that has been going around over the past week, pretty much ever since UFC 254, when Khabib Nurmagomedov submitted Justin Gaethje to retain his lightweight belt. Something has happened, and what has happened is shocking. Dare I
John Jones is
say?
really salty.
Yes, thank you. Basically, yeah. So for those of you that already know, we're just going to go ahead and talk about it and weigh in on it. Basically, what has happened this past week since Nurmagomedov beat Gaethje is that he has been moved to on the UFC's website on their official rankings list. He is now the pound for pound number one GOAT, greatest fighter of all time right now. Now, John Jones, who is the previous pound for pound great.
I get more title defenses.
Yeah. Let's see here because I had it right here. Yeah. So John Jones's he was it. I had it. Yeah, I think this is it. This is the article that I have pulled up here on Sportskeeda. This is a week old article, I believe. Yeah, this came out on the 27th, but relevant nonetheless, because we just wanted to weigh in on it now, especially since Anderson Silva just recently, quote unquote, retired from the octagon yesterday evening at UFC Vegas 12. And basically, what had happened was John Jones is pretty upset by his removal from the pound for pound rank. Not removal, he's now in the second place, but he is a little upset about it because ever since Nurmagomedov won his fight with Gaethje, keep in mind Nurmagomedov is 29-0, never lost a bout. His record is practically flawless, having technically in the UFC a record of 13-0 in the UFC. Has only lost, I believe, technically 2 rounds to opposition. The first
Yeah,
being to Conor McGregor, and
in round 3.
in round 3, and the first round against Gaethje,
Which is
in
debatable.
which is debatable because I don't know. That's that like I said, I think that's kind of up in the air.
It is still.
Because yeah,
It's one of those things that's going to have to age a little bit before people really decide for sure. But at this moment in time, he lost that round.
right, for the sake of the story.
Yeah.
And uh, people were calling him the GOAT. People are saying he's great, he's amazing, he's the greatest to ever do it. A lot of people, including ESPN's Brett Okamoto, is a person who had a great debate with, I forget his name, unfortunately, had a great debate with a coworker of his where they were debating back and forth, who really is the GOAT. Brett Okamoto of ESPN fame is very, very adamant that Khabib is the GOAT.
As well as Ariel Hawani.
Ariel Hawani, and John Jones was, as you put it so kindly earlier, a little bit salty about it because, as you can
Just a
see
little
right,
bit.
yeah, as you can
Just a
see right
little
here,
bit.
he posted a video on Twitter.
That's just one of the videos.
That's just one of many. Yes, it is one of many. As you can see, I've got like 1,000 tabs open right now on my browser.
Half of them are John Jones.
Yeah, so we had to just really keep it to a minimum. But in a way, we're going to go over what Jones has to say and then just kind of give you our own thoughts on it. So basically, Jones is saying he has so many more greatest of all time credentials over Khabib, and that the only guy who could really challenge or match his status is George St. Pierre. George St. Pierre being another contender for greatest of all time. Though there is something I do want to say right off the bat is that when we're debating who really is the greatest of all time, we have to keep in mind, George St. Pierre said this, I don't take credit for this, that the greatest of all time is relative to whatever era we're talking about.
Very important.
Because, for example, we were go all the way back to the early UFC days, you would say Hoist Gracie was
The
probably
greatest of all time.
the greatest of all time because
Won the first UFC.
he won the first UFC, he won the third UFC. You know, he beat out so many guys, and he was undefeated for a really long time. If you were to fast track to the early 2000s, you know, if we were to go there, you might say Chuck Liddell was a big
Yeah.
deal. There was a point in time where Rich Franklin was considered the greatest middleweight on Earth, on planet Earth,
Along with Forrest Griffin.
along with Forrest Griffin. So I think that, and even Vanderlei
Yeah.
Silva
All
was
of
undefeated in Pride for near 14 fights,
and
18 fights
all
actually.
yeah. And huge MMA fans at the time, whenever he was coming over to UFC, thought, oh, he's gonna dominate everybody. Boy, were they wrong.
Yeah, yeah, um,
Along with Rampage.
yeah. So
It's all relative, I believe.
it is all relative. But if we had to stay current, and if we were to only talk about UFC guys, that's what we have to, I think we have to separate for ourselves. This isn't greatest of all time in MMA period, because there are a lot of great talents that don't even compete in the UFC. For instance, Fedor Emelianenko never
Never.
competed in UFC, and yet
Considered with the greatest martial artist ever in some places.
in some places it's one of those things where, for me, I have a separate criteria that determines what makes you one of the greatest of all time, and that is, um, at what point did you stop fighting? Because if you're someone like Fedor Emelianenko, if we were talking about the time period from when he was just on top of the world, didn't lose to anybody, except for like maybe one or two technical losses, like when he got like a cut over his eye or something.
Yeah,
Um,
doctor stoppage or
yeah,
silly decisions.
yeah. Then I would say Fedor Emelianenko is hands down probably the GOAT in mixed martial arts. However,
I
he
would
can
say at least in Pride at that time, he's the GOAT.
probably. Um, but then as time went on, after his loss to Fabricio Verdum, and you know, it's kind of like then you start getting into his career after the fact, where he starts fighting other people, and he has his
His
losses are
Bellator
more abundant.
career.
Exactly, Strike Force career, Bellator career, um, Affliction career, which I don't even think really got off the ground.
I think he fought once in Golden Gloves. I might be wrong.
Yeah, obviously, it's just kind of like that's part of the criteria I look at, because if we're going to talk about who is the GOAT, um, one of the people that came to mind that I wanted to ask you here was Anderson Silva, because that's a guy who you and I talked about, and I pulled this up on Reddit because I saw this was before um, last night's UFC event, and I pulled this up because with someone like Anderson Silva, who as of yesterday, I think he at before yesterday, I'm sorry, was the oldest uh, person on the roster of the UFC roster, current at 45, had all these different credentials you see on your screen right now. Longest championship reign in UFC history, over 2,400 days. Longest win streak in UFC history at 16. And keep in mind, that's within the UFC. Khabib obviously has only been in the UFC for about 13 fights, even though he's undefeated. So Anderson still holds that distinction. Most finishes in UFC title fights, 9 finishes. And that's something that's a big deal too, because even George St. Pierre,
Didn't
who
finish a lot.
didn't finish a lot, it was pretty much after his loss to Matt Serra. I think he only had 1 or 2 finishes after that, and that was like in
One of them being Michael Bisping in his last fight, which is one of his most amazing finishes, I believe.
exactly one of his most awe-inspiring for sure. Most fights in the middleweight division, 13, which of course is just division exclusive. But we're talking about pound for pound across the board, not just exclusive to your division.
Yeah, because then he had a few light heavyweight fights as well.
Yeah, and that's another reason I don't include fighters like maybe Stipe Miocic or something, because he's definitely the greatest heavyweight in the UFC history.
Oh, that's a whole different argument whenever you get into weight classes.
Exactly, which is why we're sticking solely to
Pound for pound.
pound for pound. 10 title defenses in a row, 14 fight bonuses,
Which is crazy.
and 17 pay-per-view main events. And that's not including all the pay-per-views he's been on that weren't main events, like his light heavyweight bout against Daniel Cormier at UFC 200.
Yeah.
So Anderson Silva clearly has the resume for GOAT. But when compared to guys like Khabib and John Jones, at what point do you have a cutoff? Because if we were talking about the Anderson Silva from last night, probably not in the GOAT contention. But if we're talking about the Anderson Silva from before 2013, there's a bit of a discussion there.
Yeah. So that's why I'm going to cut this argument a little bit short. I think Anderson Silva is the GOAT from that time period.
Okay.
Like how George St. Pierre said, it's all about what era you're talking about. And if we line it up, it goes like Hoist Gracie, the Iceman, Chuck Liddell. Then you could argue Rich Franklin, Forrest Griffin, somewhere around there. Then Anderson Silva for the longest stretch.
Mm-hmm.
So if at some point the UFC ends, I think Anderson Silva will be the one that a lot of people remember. Mm-hmm. Because if YouTube and going viral and all of that was going on, a lot of Anderson Silva's stuff would have broke the internet at the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's just one of those, like, casual fans around the world know who Anderson Silva is.
Yeah.
It's just one of those arguments where, like, I got into UFC earlier in my youth because of people like Brock Lesnar and Anderson Silva and Matt Hughes and just people that you would see highlights of. And this is that guy, for me at least. In my opinion, Anderson Silva would be the GOAT. But we could go on to argue statistics and whatnot, but it's all relative.
Yes. So if we were to leave Anderson Silva behind and talk about John Jones,
the modern era,
the current controversy, if we were to call it that, John Jones versus Khabib Nurmagomedov. What's going on?
How would you say it?
How would I say it?
How do you see it? I mean,
I see it as first. I think the first thing we have to take into consideration is recency bias.
Of course,
because Khabib just won a great fight, a great victory on his resume. Justin Gaethje was who a lot of people were considering going to be the person that was going to put Khabib out, put him away. You especially, I remember.
I bet $20 on it. So let's just. The same kind of thing as you were saying, recency bias. After his ass whooping of Tony Ferguson, I was just on a Justin Gaethje high.
Mm-hmm.
That I thought he could really he could climb the mountain.
Yeah, because I mean,
I really thought he might be able to.
Because a lot of people thought Tony Ferguson was going to be the guy, and Justin Gaethje beat that guy.
Exactly, which is it. To relate to it, I also thought that Justin Gaethje would be the person to climb and finally figure out the puzzle of Tony Ferguson, and he did. Mm-hmm. And in that, I thought, oh, he could go a step further and beat Khabib, mm-hmm. But I was wrong.
Right.
In doing so, though, I think you have to, if we are looking at recency bias, you kind of have to look at the last three or so fights of both guys.
Yes.
And in doing so,
I wanted to bring up.
Yeah. So if you do that in John Jones's last 3 fights, they weren't as exciting. If you look at his Anthony Smith fight, his Thiago Sanchez fight, his Dominic Reyes fight, I was trying to do it without looking at the things mm-hmm. out of just memory, and I did it pretty good.
Yeah, you did great.
But they were all like Thiago Sanchez was split decision, who I thought Thiago would win. I was like watched that one live at Buffalo Wild Wings and thought for sure that was going to be the one that John Jones lost by decision because he didn't do enough.
Right.
Because in his last 3 fights, all decision victories, but he had to get carried out of a lot of those fights limping.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever seen Khabib limp out of a fight?
No. And
That's
and keep in mind, his very last fight against Dominic Reyes was probably the
the
closest.
closest, other than the first Gustafsson fight.
Yes, but that's another thing that we have to consider. Um, Going off of what you're saying, John Jones is one of his biggest defenses as to why he should still be considered the pound for pound great. Is he has um, technically 15 title fights, but 14 title defenses. Habib
Yeah,
only has 4 total title fights, 3 defenses.
but it's one of those things like quality over quantity.
Exactly, and
Because Khabib finished all 3 of those title defenses by submission victory
exactly.
versus decision victory in almost half of those fights of
Yeah,
John Jones.
yeah. Like he only got the decision over Alec Quinta, and he pretty much dominated that fight.
And that fight was crazy.
Yeah. But Conor McGregor submitted in the fourth. Dustin Poirier submitted in the third. Justin Gaethje submitted in the second. I mean, it kind of, to me, if you look at his first title fight, unanimous decision at round 5, Conor McGregor at round 4, Poirier at 3, Gaethje at 2. It just seems like
It's like he's getting better each time.
exactly. And if we look at just how he, in a way, dominated Justin Gaethje. I mean, left no room for any doubt that he was the, in my opinion, the greatest lightweight of all time. Then that opened the door for him to be considered the pound for pound greatest of all time. Because you look at it like you said, you look at it based on how close those fights were, how good they did in those fights. John Jones, in the early part of his title run, I mean, yeah, technically he's undefeated as well. He has 1 technical loss, but he's pretty much undefeated.
As well, yes.
And he dominated all his fights. You know, he dominated the Mauricio Hua, Jackson, Machida. He pretty much dominated Evans, even though it went to a decision. Submitted,
It was still a beating.
yeah, submitted Vitor Belfort, beat up on Chael Sonnen, and then once it gets to Alexander Gustafsson, like you said, is when it starts becoming that first bout against Alexander Gustafsson. It starts becoming
I think Gustafsson won that fight.
right.
I'm a Gustafsson believer in that.
Yeah,
I'm a John Jones denier in that fight for
yeah,
sure.
and
I just don't think he did enough to win that.
it starts becoming a little gray. You know,
It
the
does.
the oil in the water
And
starts
then the
to
no
mix.
contest to Daniel Cormier.
Yeah, and then after
And then the
that Gustafsson fight,
suspensions,
yeah, then you start looking at all that other stuff, and we'll get to
the
that in a
deep.
second. But you have the Gustafsson fight. After that, you had 1, 2, 3 decisions right after that. So 4 decisions back to back to back to back, and he dominated most of these fights for sure. Dominated, but then you get into his no contests with Daniel Cormier. PEDs start entering the picture. You start looking at
Arrests.
arrests. But if we were to, but I want to be one of those people that kind of leaves the whole stuff that takes place, you know, the alcohol abuse, you know, the hit and
It's just
runs, all that stuff, leave that out of the discussion.
it
It's
is, but
it's
at the
hard to
same
look at it
it's
without.
hard to look at it. In my opinion, it's one of those things like you got to be the champion inside and outside the ring.
Yeah,
But we'll take that aside for today.
yeah. And but PEDs, that's a tough thing to leave because that
It
directly
is.
affects performances inside the octagon.
And when entire things has to get stripped from UFC history
Yeah.
and placed
And
as a no contest instead of a head kick knockout.
yeah, and then you have also what was I going to say? You have also the fact that Jones has been stripped of his title. You have the fact that John Jones has openly admitted to hiding from USADA. Um, PEDs kind of muddle that picture and that greatness legacy we have of John Jones. But then he comes back and he beats Alexander Gustafsson, who at the time was the only person we really thought was the guy that could beat Jones.
In a
But he
I'll give him the credit, that was a very dominant fight
was a
for
very
on his
sound
part.
ass whooping, yes. And but then he has immediately after that 3 back to back to back close decisions with Anthony
Where he
Smith,
edged it out.
yeah, Thiago Santos and Dominic Reyes. Dominic Reyes, I still believe, is possibly the closest decision. I can't understand. Thiago Santos was a split decision. I can't understand how Dominic Reyes was not a split decision.
Me either. I think those last 2 fights could have gone either way for sure.
Exactly. And keep in mind, Thiago Santos' knee had been like completely blown out.
They both had. They both had to get walked out with 2 people on each shoulder.
Yeah.
And I've just it's one of those things where how are you going to call somebody out like Khabib, who's never had to get pulled out on a stretcher,
Mm-hmm.
always was fresh, never really got lost around except for the 2 that are kind of murky, could be a loss, could be not. We'll decide that later in history.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just one of those things where you never see Khabib really beat up after a fight ever.
Mm-hmm.
And if
And
he's tired from beating somebody up.
yeah, and you might get a kick out of this. How there it might be small to some, but it's another thing that you think of. How many times has John Jones eye gouged somebody? You know, uh,
Oh,
just
just like little, yeah, yeah,
little
yeah. I know
little
what you
stuff like that. That kind of is
grab the
just like
fence.
yeah, stuff like that. And Habib doesn't do that. Habib hasn't done
People do
stuff
that when
like
they're
that.
fighting Khabib because they're like, oh, I have to cheat.
They have to, right?
Yeah,
So like you said, I don't look at it from the perspective. It's one of those things where I look at it and I'm like, John Jones statistically, I think you
beats
look
him.
at it, beats
Yeah,
him. He runs the gambit of having that GOAT status.
yeah.
And but when I look at someone like Habib and I look at Habib's record, I see a damn near, I can't even say damn near, it's a flawless record. Flawless record. Jones has been accused of the PEDs, illegal elbows. He has a technical loss on his record because of something like that. Whether or not you want to call it a fluke or something, it's still there. You have the eye gouges. You have the behavior towards his opponents, the somewhat two-faced nature. I think at the end of the day, the other thing that really bothers me when it comes to this conversation and kind of transitioning here a little bit, the thing that kind of bothers me about why I'm reluctant to give Jones the satisfaction of being called pound for pound great is really his attitude towards it. Because, like I said, the reason I brought up recency bias in the beginning was because Nurmagomedov, there's a likely chance that the reason he got that attention is not only because he most recently competed and competed well, but also retired
And retired on top.
and retired on the top, the most top you could possibly be at his peak level. Jones, on the other hand, decided to do this thing John Jones does pretty much anytime someone wants to have a moment in the sport about them and their
Just got to
greatness and
take it from
achievements.
him.
It's exactly, he's got to make it all about him. People give Conor McGregor shit for doing stuff like that, and yeah, he does the same thing, but I don't think you can find someone as guilty of doing that as John Jones. John Jones refuses to let anybody else have shine except for him. He has
And
to be the
then,
center of attention.
as well as he on at the moment that Khabib won, tweeted out that something positive, then immediately retracted and started doing all this.
Yeah, and then this pretty much outweighed any of the one positive thing that he did.
Exactly.
And I think for me that, because you have to look at it like greatness comes in all forms. You know, George St. Pierre, I think, is one of the greatest of all time because of his behavior and of his demeanor. Jones, I think, stops becoming someone who's great in my eyes because he can't ever be respectful enough to just let other people think how they feel. If Habib fans want to sit there and say to John Jones that Habib is the greatest of all time, John Jones should be classy enough to sit there and say, okay, well, that's how you feel. Let me, instead of sitting here trying to say all this stuff, let me keep doing what I'm doing. And then one day I'll be on top again. Because Habib's retired. All John Jones has to do is move up to heavyweight, fuck somebody up in heavyweight, and then he's back on top again. It kind of, to me, it's as simple as that. And it comes down to just let the man have his moment. Let the man have his moment. Let the fans be the ones that discuss it. You don't see George St. Pierre or Anderson Silva sitting around debating on whether or not they're the greatest of all time.
They let their accolades speak for themselves.
Exactly. You let the fans, the commentators, the
I got.
news teams, all those people do
So,
that for you.
what's your top 5, sir?
Top 5 greatest of all time, pound for
Yep,
pound.
pound for pound.
Top 5 greatest pound for pound
In your
fighters.
opinion, it doesn't have to. No stats. In your opinion.
Yeah. Okay. Uh, in UFC specifically.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. In the UFC specifically, greatest pound for pound fighters, in my opinion, are starting from top to greatest to even greater is
Yeah,
probably
for
number
5 to
5.
1.
Probably number 5 is that's tough because I think about guys like I guess if at and this is just based on whatever era they were in. Um, Matt Hughes. I mean, I have to give it to Matt Hughes. I'm a big, huge Matt Hughes fan. I love Matt
My
Hughes.
5. My number 5 would be Matt Hughes as well.
Yeah, I give it to him just because his record I think speaks for itself. He's a great guy. Just in terms of octagon stuff, I know there's a lot of controversy with him outside the octagon, but we're talking about just his accolades alone. You know, and he was one of the first guys to have 5 title defenses back to back. He's one of only 2 people to beat George St. Pierre. I think that speaks volumes. So number 5 is Matt Hughes. Number 4. Number 4 is probably going to have to be Anderson Silva, just because Anderson Silva really was the GOAT at one time. You couldn't, I think at one point in time, he was probably the number 1 GOAT. I think the thing that kind of spoils Anderson Silva's reign or potential at a number 1 spot is the fact that he was way past his prime at a certain point. After his defeat to Chris Weidman twice,
And the leg break.
yeah, I think that kind of just ruined everything. I think that ruined his run. I think that ruined his reign. I think the fact that he tried to compete more after that, um, I think that was commendable and it's admirable, but I think it really sullied his legacy, in my opinion. Number three, I would probably have to give to George St. Pierre. I'd have to put Habib and Jones above St. Pierre just because they're current and they're doing it good, just because Jones is doing more than what St. Pierre did. And people like, even though St. Pierre is dominant, I feel like these two are a little bit more dominant. They edge him out in dominance, especially because since then, the mixed martial arts game has really evolved as a sport. Um, so there's a lot more challenge and there's a lot more technique and skill in these 2 fighters, I think, than during the era of St. Pierre. And then number 2, this is where it gets milky.
Love that.
Yeah, this is where it gets really milky because Jones and Habib, I think, are very, very good. But if Habib were to compete some more and have more title defenses, maybe just 1 or 2 more, and we saw more of that dominance, I'd have to give it to Habib at number 1. Jones, I think, is still at that level, but I think a lot of the times when we see him not competing at the level we want to see him compete at, is because of a lack of interest. It almost seems like part of the reason he even left the light heavyweight division. Um, I think I'm just upset with Jones in general at his behavior, but I'd still have to give number 2 to Habib and number 1 to Jones.
Solid.
Yeah.
It's pretty solid right there. Good.
Yeah.
Good reasoning behind them too.
Yeah. Yeah, I really try to be fair with that stuff. Obviously, it's not going to come down to what I think,
Of
but
course not. That's why it was just more of a, what do you see?
yeah, but that's genuinely what I see. Like, despite how I disagree with the way John Jones is acting right now, I think at the end of the day, he still not only has the credentials and the accolades, but he's also, if you think about it now at this point in time, out of those 5 that I listed, is now still the only one who's technically active.
Yeah,
And I think that also speaks volumes.
it does.
So I don't know about you. I don't know if you have anybody else you'd put in there.
No, it'd be those same 5 guys.
Yeah.
Maybe in a different order, but it just also depends what day you would ask me.
Right. Yeah.
But mostly identical to what you said. Like right now, I would probably put Khabib number 1.
Right.
But other than that, pretty much identical.
Yeah. Um. So yeah, man. I mean, that just kind of that's it, right?
Yeah, that wraps up the GOAT conversation for at least right now. We'll
Yeah.
see. We'll come
Waiting like
back in a few years.
waiting like a hell, even just a year from now, if Habib does decide to come back from his retirement, which is another thing we're gonna end up talking about today. But
Of course.
we'll get to that when we get to it.
Or Izzy just goes on a tear and goes to light heavyweight and then beats John Jones, and
Mm-hmm.
anything can happen at this point.
Yeah, because
Connor can come
technically,
back and go to heavyweight.
yeah, because all Israel Adesanya has to do now is just win 10 more fights,
Yeah,
and
which you could definitely do.
he'll have beaten out Habib. Um, so yeah, so I think that's going to be it from us on this topic today, you guys. Make sure you guys like, comment, and subscribe.
Give us some support, guys. Let us know what we're doing right and wrong.
Yeah, you know what? On this video alone, let's just set a goal: 5 likes.
5 likes.
It's not
Let's
a
do
lot.
it.
I think you guys can do it. So appreciate it. Make sure you guys comment down in the comments below what you guys think. Who is the GOAT? If you're just talking about Habib versus Jones, let us know who you think is the GOAT. But since Lincoln brought it up, give us your top 5 greatest of all times in the UFC alone. If you want to give us your top 5 in just MMA in general, you can do that as well.
Go for it.
But whatever. So that's going to be it right here, and we're going to see you guys next time. Peace.